Thank you so much for staying with us, and we get straight into our conversation for the day, looking at the International World Wildlife Day that was celebrated yesterday. Now, on March 3rd, the world commemorated the World Wildlife Day, which is dedicated to celebrating and raising awareness of the world's wild fauna and flora. The date is also an auspicious one, as it was the same day in 1973 that the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES, was signed. The theme for this year's celebration is Forest and Livelihoods, Sustaining People and Planet, and aims to highlight the significance of how forests give a livelihood to many communities, especially indigenous and local communities.
Now, the theme also aligns with some specific UN Sustainable Development Goals that aim to conserve life and land, also eradicate poverty and ensure that resources are used sustainably. Now, the United Nations published back in 2019 cautioning that 1 million of the estimated 8 million plants and animal species on the planet are at risk of extinction. Many within decades because of the human activities. Now, a subsequent United Nations report published back in July last year warned that biodiversity loss and humans' destruction of nature would lead to, like the COVID-19 and the pandemic has also reportedly contributed to, and some parts of the world amplifying this risk.
Now, our guest is Desmond Majekodunmi. Desmond is one of Nigeria's foremost environmental activists, a conservationist, farmer, and he's also the founder of the Lekki Urban Forestry and Animal Shelter Initiative, known as LUFASI, which is also known as the Lungs of Lekki. Desmond, good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here with you.
All right, so Desmond, let's start with this. Now, we know between 200 and 350 million people live within or adjacent to forested areas around the world, and they rely on the various ecosystem services provided by the forest and forest species for their livelihoods and also to cover their most basic needs like food, shelter, energy, and medicine. When we're looking at the loss of these forest areas and looking at how human activity has affected them, just take us through very quickly how their lives are affected when these forests and wildlife are exposed to harm.
Yes, they are the direct recipients of the feedback that nature gives. Because there's one thing about nature, we call her Mother Nature, but she is not a forgiving mother. She doesn't have the capacity to forgive, unlike our God, unlike we human beings. Nature gives. Whatever you give nature, she gives it back to you. Fundamental laws. This is the law of action and reaction, 100%. And as I said, the people who are near the forest, who have been relying on the forest for their livelihood from time immemorial, they're the ones who are the hardest hit because their livelihoods have been so badly affected. However, it's not just the people that are near the forest, because each and every one of these wonderful creatures of nature has a role to play. Every one of them. The cats, the duikers, the deers that we're seeing jumping around now, they have a role to play. They are part of the web of life. And this web is what? It is the miracle of creation. And why do we refer to it as a miracle? Because that's exactly what it is. It gives us everything that we need for our survival, from the oxygen to the water, to the medicines, to the food. It keeps the whole planetary atmospheric system stable. It's a miracle. So it's not just the people that are near the forest that are getting badly affected. It's all of humanity. As we saw in 2020, talk about, reactions from nature. Snapped our fingers, shut humanity down.
Wow. Well, Desmond, now, according to the WWF's, Living Planet reports back last year, 2020, there has been an average of huge significant drop in terms of the amphibians, birds, fish, mammals, and even reptiles between 1970 and 2016 now, which means species are becoming extinct quicker nowadays than ever before. Desmond, over the years, you've been following this with your work. What have you seen to really support this claim?
It's absolutely correct. Even at the LUFASI Park, where we are, just on the outskirts of Lekki after Aja, we have some of the last remaining of the hooded vulture. The hooded vulture is on the endangered list. It's about to go extinct. And even the ones that we had there, we had about 30 before. Now we're only seeing about 20. The populations are declining. Populations of elephants, populations of pangolins, populations of turtles. And each one of those creatures that I just mentioned have a crucial role to play. Just the vulture alone. The vulture is one of the only creatures that can eat completely rotten flesh, and animals will die in the forest. But the vulture will be around to clean it up. Other animals now, if the vulture isn't around, will go for that rotten flesh and pick up diseases which will be spread. It's actually extremely alarming, and this is why just very recently, 2 weeks ago, Secretary General of the United Nations made this statement. He said, mankind is committing war against nature, and this is suicidal because nature always fights back, and she's fighting back with vigor. Wow.
Okay, so we'll get more into something you mentioned before, and that was sort of the link of COVID. But now, scientists have long warned that the world is entering a sixth mass extinction event. And this has been driven by humanity's consumption of wildlife. You talked about bushmeat and wild spaces and the burning of fossil fuels. Global warming is also causing ecosystems to shift faster than many species can adapt. Are we taking the scientists seriously? Are we listening to the warnings, particularly here on the continent where we have a large proportion of the world's wildlife, flora and fauna?
Excellent observation. Good question. No, we are not taking it seriously enough. When I say the we, I mean the general population. Possibly because in Nigeria, there's so many other pressing problems, immediate daily bread issues, immediate security issues. So we're putting this into the back burner. There are a few people, and I must give credit to the incumbent people at the Ministry of Environment in Lagos State particularly, but also the Federal Ministry of Environment. We're seeing some very promising signs from them. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem as if they are receiving the kind of support they need to receive. And you know what? The name of that ministry should actually be changed to the Ministry of Life Support System. Because despite all the other problems we have, if obviously the life support systems and these various species are very much part of the web of life, if these life support systems break down, then all the other problems get magnified. So no, we're not taking it nearly as seriously as possible, but we're seeing promising signs because some intelligent people in the system are being pressurized, are also pressurizing government and also the corporate sector. And this is where there's been terrible default over the years, because it's mainly the pursuit of extra profits that has driven this. You know what they say, the love of money, you worship money, that's the root of all evil. And unfortunately, the corporate sector has not been coming up to the standard at all. They have not been investing nearly enough in the CSR aspects of their reach out, which is involves environment. And certainly they have been driving a lot of this problem. I mean, when we're talking of air pollution, we know which ones in the corporate sector are causing the air pollution. Yeah. When we're talking of deforestation, So a lot more needs to be done, a whole lot more.
All right, Desmond. Another thing that science has been telling us, and is all that quite more crucial. We have to pay attention to this one. Is the wake of the coronavirus, with more diseases that passes somehow from animals to human beings, such as COVID-19, and there's a talk about bats and all that, and are likely to emerge as habitats are ravaged by wildlife exploitation and unsustainable farming practices and climate change. Now, we know that the United Nations Environmental Programme, which is preventing the next pandemic, said that zoonotic diseases with viruses like Ebola, MERS, and the West Nile virus have increasingly emerged because of stresses humans have placed on animal habitats. What do you think about this?
Wow, this is actually so much on point. The reality is that nature has given humanity a wake-up call. In fact, it's a loud alarm. God Almighty in infinite wisdom has, I feel, allowed the window of the action of retribution to be open.
You just call it retribution?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You give nature, and she gives you back. And we've been, as the UN Secretary General said, and these guys, they're very careful, they're very conservative people. For him to say that mankind is committing war against nature and it is suicidal, wow! We need to take that very, very seriously indeed. And that's exactly what happened. And we're lucky in the sense that the COVID, despite its veracity, is very highly infectious. It's not a particularly fatal virus, but by the time you combine COVID with the fatality of Ebola, oh boy, we should learn from this lesson. And the reason why the zoonotic pandemics are coming out is exactly because of what we are doing to nature. We're wrecking the biosystems. We're putting different species together that would never normally come together at all. How would a turtle from Australia come together with a pangolin from Nigeria and a bat from China? It's not possible. And each one of the mammalian species, including us humans, we have our own viral load, which we've adapted to. But by the time you start mixing these different species in a very unnatural way, you now combine these viral loads, the viral loads mix, and you get these types of pandemics. So it's a huge warning. And especially, again, back to the vulture, wipe out the vulture as we're doing, drive the vulture into extinction. And by the way, how dare we? We cannot create the vulture. So how dare we drive it into extinction? Come on. And you know what? One thing that encourages me is that, Nigeria is a very religious country, and we're talking to the religious leaders. It's there in the scripture. It's there in the Holy Quran. It's there in the Bible. We're caliphs, we're stewards, we're caretakers to now preach this gospel from the pulpit. Care for the creation. After all, the Creator said His creation is very good. So if we love the Creator, if we worship Him, let's care for His creation.
So that's what I take it we should, especially from this corona matter, we should stay away from all those unnecessary bushmeat.
Bushmeat, nobody thing now. Bushmeat, no sweet for my mouth at all. At all.
Okay.
All right, Desmond, let's look at some numbers here on the continent. So roughly 28% of the world's land surface is currently managed by indigenous peoples and local communities that are at the forefront of what is a symbiotic relationship between humans and forest-dwelling wildlife species and the ecosystem services they provide. Have we learned anything from them in terms of coexisting with the forest and the wildlife? Or are we just at the top of the food chain, and because of that, we're bullying and dominating everything else, even to our own long-term detriment? Are we finally learning some lessons?
And this is the area that we need to learn from, because in all honesty, our fathers and forefathers and mothers and foremothers, very important, they lived in harmony with nature. They lived in harmony. You had all these so-called sacred forest groves. Even the farmer, even the hunters, when they went out, they were quite selective with their kill, and they timed it well. They knew when the various bushmeat and so on would have, had their various gestation, when they would have had their children and so on. So they timed it. It's not every time that you just go and kill and kill. But unfortunately, when the technology came in and we felt that we had, so much power, honestly, it really looks as if we humans had not really evolved enough to handle the fruits of the spirit of witty invention, which gave us our various technology. We haven't been able to handle it responsibly enough. And we need to actually learn from those indigenous populations. We need to really learn a lot from them, because they live in harmony with nature. We are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. And we need to live in harmony with nature. Now stop this thing of slapping our mama. You know what happens? If you slap your mama, she's going to slap you back. So we got to learn. The indigenous people, they were really very, very good with nature. Not just in Africa, but all over the world. The Indians in America and so on, they had a very harmonious relationship. They understood that you can't overexploit nature. And, whenever they killed an animal, they did it with reverence and realization that, this animal needs to continue its own life as well. And by continuing its own life, it will help us to continue our lives. We definitely need to learn from those people.
All right, let's talk about, we as Africans, Desmond. Many countries in these parts are facing high unemployment, youth restiveness, insecurity, resource issues, education, poor healthcare, and all that. For many of us, we want to talk about the environment, but it makes it seem as if it's not important in the hierarchy of issues. What would you say to that? Because let's face it, Desmond, it's not on the top of our priority list, environmentally speaking.
I know it's so unfortunate, but it has to get back on top of it. It's like, you're in this wonderful, wonderful, good house, and maybe you've got some welding business. Welding needs quite a lot of electricity, so you're wired into the system, drawing electricity from your house, and all your children, everything you have, everything you love is in the house. And then they're telling you, somebody tells you, look, there's a bit of smoke. It looks like I can smell something burning in the ceiling, and you ignore it. And you continue because your welding business is doing well, you're thriving. And then somebody else tells you, this is more than just smelling. I can see a little bit of smoke. I think you better stop this, your welding. And you still continue. And eventually, your house catches fire. So all the other issues you had, you're doing the welding because you want to feed your family, because you want to clothe your children and send them to school, etc., etc. But your activities are actually going to destroy their very future. And so we need to get this reality into our minds, into our consciousness. Why? Because we've reached a point, and this is really, really serious. We've reached a point whereby if we continue just with the mass species extinction, let alone with the global warming, if we continue for just another 10, maybe 15 years, we go beyond a point of no return because we're unraveling the web of life. Like a web. You can remove one strand, the web is there, remove another strand is there, but by the time there'll be one strand you remove and the whole web will collapse. And this is what the scientists are telling us.
Yeah, Desmond, from what you're saying, it looks like you're echoing the words of what we heard from, the great man himself, Sir David Attenborough, last week, who said that in the next decade, this global warming and crisis climate will be irreversible. Are you echoing those words too here?
Absolutely, 100%. There's reasons why they're coming to that conclusion. He's relying on the science, and now the way that the science reads the system is far better. They're using high technology satellites. They're using great technology to see that. And you have what they call, tipping points. With the global warming scenario, you have certain tipping points. That is, if certain areas like the permafrost, if they melt too much, permafrost is called permafrost because it's permanently frozen. And underneath that frozen layer is hundreds of millions of tons of things like methane gas and CO2 that's been trapped. That's been trapped for thousands and thousands of years. But if that permafrost melts, which is what it's doing, it starts to release those gases. And those gases will now cause more heat, which will cause more melt. And that's the typical scenario that they call the tipping point. And there's several others. So it's a huge alarm it's been blowing. But there is good news.
Okay.
You want to hear the good news?
Please.
Very quickly.
The good news is that, like COVID brought the whole world together to solve the problem, we have a common problem all around humanity. In Nigeria, we have a common problem. The Yorubas, the Igbos, the Fulani, the Hausas, it's a common problem, and that is nature is being degraded. We need to come together to solve this common problem. If we love our children, which I know we do, and if we love our God, which I know we do, we'll come together and solve the problem.
All
and
right.
the quick way to solve the problem, trees, and more trees. Forest, no more pollution.
Yeah.
All right, and no more bushmeats and the hunter.
What is this thing with the bushmeat?
Because it looks like the bushmeat is chasing the hunter now.
At this point, Desmond Majekodunmi, environmental activist, conservationist, thank you as always for your time. We definitely will be speaking with you again.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Wow.
Wow.
And I think it just doesn't sink in, but when you think about it, and he's talking about the permafrost, we've seen scientists tell us that they've seen melting of the ice caps like they haven't seen before. And what does that mean? For a city like Lagos that is below sea level, it means that we are in danger of rising sea levels. Rising sea levels, swampy, marshy conditions, more malaria. These things lead to health issues, they lead to displacements, they lead to insecurity, and I just worry about African governments prioritizing environment, which can affect every other thing.
Well, it's a conversation we all have to carry on together, just like Desmond said. We've seen what, this unhealthy mixing, of heavy viral dose between humans and animals and COVID-19.
That worries me because all the scientists are saying, get ready, there will be more pandemics like COVID-19.
Yeah. And when you watch that movie again, Contagion, you just ask, from this to that, and that's it, right? Let's not scare you.
He was a prophet. He was a prophet. But let's quickly add, Olisa mentioned David Attenborough. If you haven't seen his documentary, please go and watch it. It really breaks down. And this is a man globally recognized as one of the foremost conservationists and environmental activists. And he talked about his work over decades and what he has seen human activity, our activity, your activity, due to the environments that we need to live. It will cause you to think.
All right, a quick break will do from us. When we come back, we've got so much more, including sports. Stay with us.